Donald Trump's attacks on the Pope today included the nonsensical statement, quote, "I think he's very weak on crime." There has never been a pope in favor of crime, and Donald Trump is the first politician in American history who thinks the Pope is some kind of political candidate that he is campaigning against. Donald Trump also told the demented lie in attacking the Pope that Iran wants to, quote, exterminate the world. Now, think of the level of depraved stupidity involved in that statement. Iran wants nuclear weapons, quote, so they can exterminate the world, end quote. That is Donald Trump's childlike understanding of nuclear weapons that has apparently not become even slightly more informed as a result of becoming president and being in control of nuclear weapons himself. After another brush with Donald Trump's madness today, Pope Leo said this.
I have no fear, neither the Trump administration nor speaking out loudly about the message of the gospel. And that's what I believe I am called to do, what the church is called to do. We're not politicians. We're not looking to make foreign policy, as he calls it, with the same perspective that he might understand it. But I do believe that the message of the gospel, blessed are the peacemakers, is the message that the world needs to hear today.
And not one of those Republican Catholics in the House or the Senate had the courage to say today, I agree with the Pope. Not one of them. Donald Trump's longest-serving White House Chief of Staff, former Marine Corps General John Kelly, according to a report in the New York Times today, concluded that Donald Trump was mentally ill. John Kelly reached that conclusion possibly after learning about a book on this program that we featured repeatedly on this program, co-authored by mental health professionals, called The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. The Times reports today, quote, John F. Kelly, his longest-serving White House Chief of Staff in the first term, even bought a book by 27 of those specialists called The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump in an effort to understand his boss, and came to the conclusion that he was mentally ill. And that is not a 6-inch headline in newspapers around the country, around the world tonight. Donald Trump was mentally ill, says Chief of Staff. Imagine if an Obama White House Chief of Staff, a Biden White House Chief of Staff, a Bush White House Chief of Staff, any White House Chief of Staff had ever said that the president and the White House they served in was mentally ill. If that was said at any point in time during or after a presidency, it would be huge news. But now it's buried inside a longer New York Times article under the headline, Trump's erratic behavior and extreme comments revive mental health debate. The article shows a photograph of Donald Trump with a couple of his favorite people, Tucker Carlson and then Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, in 2022, just having the time of their lives. And now Donald Trump says both of those dear friends are, as he puts it, low IQ. Donald Trump says, quote, they're nut jobs, troublemakers, and will say anything necessary for some free and cheap publicity. And Donald Trump says that about them because they oppose his war in Iran. Donald Trump's flip against those former friends is now counted in the New York Times today as one of the indicators of Donald Trump's, quote, erratic behavior. The Times quotes Donald Trump's threat to Iran last week, saying a whole civilization will die tonight, a threat that is in and of itself a war crime. And the Times turns to Ty Cobb, who was a White House lawyer in Donald Trump's first term, to quote him, telling Jim Acosta that Donald Trump is, quote, a man who is clearly insane. And that is from Donald Trump's former friend and lawyer. In the Times assessment of Donald Trump's apparent cognitive decline, Democratic Senate leader Chuck Schumer is quoted calling Donald Trump an extremely sick person and unhinged. And Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin's letter to the White House physician requesting an evaluation of Donald Trump is quoted, noting signs consistent with dementia and cognitive decline and increasingly incoherent, volatile profane, deranged, and threatening tantrums. And so in a period where much of the news media is catching up to this program's coverage of Donald Trump's mental health, which began 10 years ago here, Donald Trump added considerably to John Kelly's case that he is, in fact, mentally ill by posting this image of himself appearing as a Christ-like Savior. How much dementia does it take for the President of the United States to send that false image of himself around the world? Is that what John Kelly means by mental illness? This is one of the rare Trump social media posts that he removed, actually took down, after being criticized for presenting himself as God in what amounts to blasphemy for many of Donald Trump's right-wing Christian nationalist supporters. Donald Trump then defended that image, saying that it's really an image of him as a doctor. That's what he said. That's a doctor, not an image of him as Jesus Christ. If we put that image back up, you can wonder why he didn't explain what that thing is in his left hand in the image, the magical glowing orb that none of us have ever seen in a doctor's office. But let's just take the man who John Kelly says is mentally ill at his word. Let's just pretend for a moment that the imagery there was very clear and it was actually Donald Trump as a doctor. Let's pretend it was Donald Trump in a white coat with a stethoscope around his neck. How would that be any less insane? And anyone who is demanding more proof of the insanity of Donald Trump has to recognize that you're asking for more proof than his White House lawyer Ty Cobb needed to declare Donald Trump insane and to say it publicly. And you're asking for more proof than Donald Trump's longest-running White House chief of staff, John Kelly, needed to call Donald Trump mentally ill. But if you are asking for more proof that Donald Trump is insane, there is his latest military announcement about the war he started with Iran without being able to explain why he started that war. Donald Trump has announced that the United States Navy will now blockade the Strait of Hormuz. Now, recall that the day before Donald Trump's war began, the Strait of Hormuz was wide open to shipping of all kinds, and it has been during every other war in the Middle East. It was only because Donald Trump started a war against Iran that Iran decided on the strategy of closing the Strait of Hormuz. And then, in the single most foolish strategic shift in the history of American warfare, Donald Trump's immediate goal in the war he started was then opening the Strait of Hormuz, which was open before he started his war. And having failed completely to open the Strait of Hormuz, Donald Trump's next strategy was to say, I, Donald Trump, will close the Strait of Hormuz, will block the Strait of Hormuz. So Iran blocked the Strait of Hormuz. Donald Trump wants them to open it. They won't open it, so Donald Trump says, I will block it. Is that anything other than outright screaming insanity? CENTCOM had to correct Donald Trump's public declaration about his intention of blocking the strait to say, CENTCOM's correction was to say that the United States Navy was going to not blockade the Strait of Hormuz, but blockade or try to blockade ships entering and exit Iranian ports, if anything. Not even clear that they're going to do that. No one who voted against Donald Trump 3 times can be surprised by any of this Trump madness. He was clearly the stupidest person ever to win a major party nomination in 2016 when he became a Republican nominee for president the first time. Donald Trump reeked of stupidity then in everything he said about every one of his childlike fantasies about how government or the presidency could work, beginning with Mexico will pay for the wall. Everyone who voted against Donald Trump 3 times knew that he should never be trusted with the nuclear codes. Everyone who voted against Donald Trump 3 times knew that he could never possibly carry out the role of commander-in-chief of the American military. And so now the president, who John Kelly thought was mentally ill in his first term, has launched a war that is now defined by a madman posting images of himself as Jesus Christ while he is telling the Pope that the Pope is wrong. And we got here because Donald Trump, in his first term, when his White House chief of staff thought he was mentally ill, tore up the greatest diplomatic achievement of our lifetimes, the deal negotiated by Secretary of State John Kerry and President Obama, in which Iran agreed not to develop nuclear weapons. And this weekend, not surprisingly, Donald Trump's vice president failed to reach an agreement with Iran on anything. It would have been considered a huge victory for J.D. Vance to achieve even half of what John Kerry and our next guest, Under Secretary of State Wendy Sherman, achieved in their negotiations with Iran. And where was Donald Trump during the crucial moments of this weekend's negotiations with Iran? In another sign that Donald Trump is mentally ill, he was at an ultimate fighting festival in Miami because Donald Trump doesn't even know how to fake being presidential in time of war or ever. And Donald Trump doesn't know how to fake at least appearing to be sane.